U.S. President Barack Obama will give his farewell speech to the nation after 8 years in office. Obama will look back at his legacy and encourage supporters who are not thrilled by President-elect Donald Trump's win to the White House. Obama is the first African-American to serve as the President of the United States. He'll leave after 8 years on the 20th of January when Trump will be inaugurated. Many of Obama's top achievements may be overturned by Republicans, including Obamacare, his Affordable Health Care Act, as well as his climate change policies. Obama will speak at 9 p.m. Eastern. That's about 30 minutes from now, India time. He'll speak from Chicago, where he started his political career. Parts of his speech will talk about him trying to figure out who he was, his purpose in life, his affiliations to his faith, and what he was up to during his 20s with all of the grassroots movements in Chicago. Even though the president is not too overly sentimental, this speech will likely be nostalgic. Obama says he'll miss traveling on the presidential aircraft, Air Force One, a perk that he says he'll miss after leaving the office. He's traveled more than 400 times on that jet. Obama also plans to talk about his achievements during his 8 years in office and wants his supporters to fight for things like the environment, gay rights, and economic equality. Obama will stay in Washington for the next 2 years at least while his daughter, Sasha, finishes high school, but he says he does plan to give Donald Trump his space during his time in office. Well, U.S. President Obama, as we mentioned, is set to speak in just about 30 minutes. Mixed reactions are coming in from Cuba, where the Cubans consider the reestablishment of the U.S.-Cuba relations as a huge milestone in Obama's foreign policy relations. It marked a dramatic change from the approach of his predecessor, George Bush. Many Cubans say they hoped Obama could have done much more to improve the relations between the United States and Cuba. Negotiations between both countries are still going on many issues, such as the U.S. nationalization compensation claims, Cuba's demand for embargo preparations, the extradition of fugitives, and the return of the Guantanamo naval base to Cuba. Let's listen in.
Obama fue una figura de cambio, pero deja en demasía, ¿no?, los deseos de los cubanos de querer el cambio real, ¿no? Aunque representó para muchos sectores del pueblo cubano, representó un avance.
Él hizo un cambio, él hizo la diferencia un poco, ¿no? Pero bueno, en mi casa pienso que sí, que está bien, que lo voy a recordar, ¿no? Lo voy a considerar un poco, pero pudo haber hecho más.
Let's also listen into some of President Obama's memorable speeches right now.
Tonight, we gather to affirm the greatness of our nation, not because of the height of our skyscrapers or the power of our military or the size of our economy. Our pride is based on a very simple premise, summed up in a declaration made over 200 years ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
At various stages in the campaign, some commentators have deemed me either too black or not black enough. We saw racial tensions bubble to the surface during the week before the South Carolina primary. The press has scoured every single exit poll for the latest evidence of racial polarization, not just in terms of white and black, but black and brown as well.
I'm really proud of you, and what you described.
All right, now we're joined by Aruna Viswanathan from Buffalo. He is a cybersecurity expert as well as a professor at the University of Buffalo. Arun, thanks so much for joining us. Just about 20 minutes away until we hear Obama's final farewell speech in Chicago. The 8 years seem to have definitely gone by. He's accomplished quite a bit. Talk to us a little bit about his legacy.
Well, you know, it's too early to say, what an impact he's had. But I think he has, in 8 years, done a remarkable feat. I mean, just imagine what it was 8 years ago when he took office. I mean, we were facing a recession. The economy was in a shambles. The auto industry had all but collapsed. And just the very fact that he revived it and brought it back to where it is, where we now are showing a growth for the second and third year running. I mean, that in itself is a legacy few presidents can talk about. Not to mention the stuff that he's done when it comes to the environment, when it comes to cybersecurity. I mean, he has taken a very, very active stand when it comes to domestic politics and international issues. So, thanks to him, the Chinese and the United States signed an environmental accord, which led to the Paris Agreement. So I think Obama is going to be judged very, very fairly and very, very highly in the years to come when we really start looking at his legacy and realizing what he did for this nation.
Arun, let me also ask you, we certainly saw about Obamacare, many different things that he's come up with, and now there's concern by many who are concerned that Donald Trump and the Republicans may change some of the things that Obama was able to bring in during his 8 years in office. How likely is any of that going to be a reality, at least anytime soon?
It's too early to tell, right? We're still, Donald Trump is a different type of politician, to put it lightly. He has been talking about it, and the question is, can the rhetoric be matched with real action? Because the real action has real consequences. Let's not forget, 20 million Americans now have health care who did not have it before. So repealing things is easier said than done unless we have an option for these 20 million people. Let's not forget, not only have 20 million people got health insurance, the overall cost of healthcare has actually gone down, although premiums have slightly gone up in 2017. And the OBM basically came out with a statement saying the premiums that did go up went up just for a correction, and it's not probably going to go up anymore. So to come back to your point, it's easier said than done. We don't have an alternative. So taking something away is far harder. It's easy to talk about it, but you got to give people an option. And there isn't anything else that's viable in the horizon.
Arun, a question that, we'll throw out to you. We've asked many of our guests this question before. When it comes to, if the Constitution allowed it, if there was a third term possible, do you think that Obama could have been reelected?
Well, if you looked at the data today, the Quinnipiac poll was released, and they said, and in the poll, we had Obama with a 55% approval rating. In contrast to that, Donald Trump had a 35% approval rating. So in theory, if an election were held, right, it's a hypothetical question, if an election were held today, Obama would actually win. Would he make a great president? I certainly think so. But of course, the Constitution doesn't let it, and that's how this union has been formed and retained. We respect the Constitution.
All right, Aruna Viswanathan, thank you so much for all your perspective. I know that speech is coming up in a short while. I know you'll be watching, and many people around the world. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much for having me, Arian.
All right, now let's take a look at a special preview of Barack Obama's domestic policies and his legacy, one that changes he made when nobody was paying attention.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear
that I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully. Congratulations, Mr. President.
The 2008 election was a historic moment for America. Barack Obama, the country's first ever African-American president, had triumphed with the promise of hope and change. What lay ahead was a daunting task. The U.S. was in the midst of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. In one of his first acts as president, Obama authorized a nearly $800 billion stimulus package to stem job losses. That was followed by a lengthy battle over healthcare reform, or Obamacare. It was a debate that was only settled in the Supreme Court in 2015. At the heart of the legislative battle that Obama faced was the polarization of America into two distinct ideological camps. At one end were those that wanted spending cuts and less regulation. The others insisted that government was the key to American economic recovery. As Obama returned to the Oval Office in 2012, this was the debate that played out in the form of the showdown over the fiscal cliff.
The longer the White House slow walks this discussion, the closer our economy gets to the fiscal cliff, and the more American jobs are placed in jeopardy.
The 2013 New Year compromise between Democrats and Republicans in Congress didn't last long. In October that year, bickering over the budget led to a 2-week federal government shutdown, the first such case in 17 years. While the gridlock in Washington continued, it was in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, that Obama would face his gravest challenge. The shooting of an unarmed African-American man by a white police officer brought to the fore America's simmering racial tensions. In the months that followed, more cases of police brutality against minorities created mass uproar. Added to that was the growing specter of gun violence in the country. From Newtown to Charleston to San Bernardino to Orlando, a spate of mass shootings had left the country shaken. Despite that, the president had failed in his attempts to pass comprehensive gun law reforms. The issues of atrocities against minorities and America's gun problem finally became entangled in Dallas in July 2016, as an Afghan war veteran opened fire on police officers during a protest rally.
Now, I'm not naive. I have spoken at too many memorials during the course of this presidency. I've hugged too many families who've lost a loved one to senseless violence. And I've seen how a spirit of unity born of tragedy can gradually dissipate.
It was in this backdrop that Obama inaugurated the country's first African-American museum in September this year. The building, he hopes, will be a hallmark of his legacy. In the final few months of his presidency, the Obama White House has been working overtime to project his tenure as one in which, despite its divisions, America moved towards becoming a more inclusive society. That is the kind of policy continuity that he believes a Hillary Clinton presidency will bring. As far as his own future is concerned, the 44th President of the United States of America clearly has some thinking to do. In New Delhi, Manoj Kevalramani, WION.
Joining us now live from Washington, D.C. is WION's correspondent Giles Gibson via phone. Giles, thank you so much for joining us. Just moments away to hear Obama's farewell speech in Chicago. We know that he's done a lot during his 8 years. What are some of the most memorable things, both within the United States and outside, that he'll be remembered for?
Well, actually, I think it's actually sort of very apt that one of his final acts as president is a speech. Of course, his entire real career has been punctuated by these key speeches right back from 2004, the Democratic National Convention, when he was a sort of little-known state senator, and he really announced himself on the world stage with this speech talking about the politics of hope, the audacity of hope over the politics of cynicism. And then throughout his presidency since 2009, he's punctuated that tenure with these key speeches, a race speech in 2008, a speech in Selma in 2015, and a gun control speech in January last year, where he broke into tears describing his reaction to some of the victims. So I think it's certainly apt that it's a speech that he's using to sum up his 8 years in office.
And Giles, as you mentioned, he had quite a bit on his plate when he came into office 8 years ago. Just a few days left before the 20th of January when Trump will be inaugurated. Is there any kind of a concern at this point by those who support the Democrats, who are Democratic supporters who are unfortunately that Hillary Clinton didn't win, are now concerned that Trump may reverse a lot of Obama's policies, including his take on Obamacare, climate change, and economic equality?
Well, that's right, Archie. Democratic supporters will be fearful that a lot of those sort of key parts of Obama's legacy could, very quickly fall down. Trump has made no secret that he's going to put Obamacare, that he's going to get rid of that and replace it with new legislation. And you mentioned climate change. I was interviewing an environmental activist today, actually, and he was saying that a lot of environmental activists here in the U.S. are really fearful about the impacts that Donald Trump could have on that Paris climate change and some of the initiatives that Obama has brought in to cut carbon emissions here in the U.S.
All right, Giles, we're going to have you stand by for just a moment. Let's take a look now really quickly about the things that Obama has been able to accomplish when it comes to foreign policy. Obama has been putting his stamp on U.S. foreign policy and by what he's done and what he's chosen not to do. Let's take a look at his legacies.
Change has come to America.
It was a presidency that began with the promise of a new era in American leadership. The unilateralism of the Bush administration had dented America's global image, and the lingering wars in Afghanistan and Iraq had exposed the limits of military solutions. Such was the environment that the mere election of Barack Obama to the Oval Office was greeted with a Nobel Peace Prize.
I am both surprised and deeply humbled by the decision of the Nobel Committee. Let me be clear, I do not view it as a recognition of my own accomplishments, but rather as an affirmation of American leadership on behalf of aspirations held by people in all nations.
A masterful orator, the 44th President of the United States had come in with the mandate of ending America's wars, bridging divides, and pursuing diplomacy, a policy that was outlined in a historic address at Cairo University.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and one based upon the truth that America and Islam are not exclusive and need not be in competition.
While the Obama doctrine did involve working with allies and through multilateral fora, during his tenure, the US only found itself further entangled in conflicts in the Islamic world. Apart from Iraq and Afghanistan, the US is also engaged in the conflicts in Libya, Yemen, and of course, Syria. The last of those, along with the rise of the Islamic State and the failure to capitalize on the Arab Spring, will in all likelihood be seen as one of Obama's greatest foreign policy failures.
In good times,
over in Europe,
and
his
in bad,
efforts did lead to improved ties
Europe
with
can
traditional
count
allies
on the United
and support
States.
for NATO. But even those relationships suffered through serious hiccups in the summer of 2013. Edward Snowden's revelations of the National Security Agency's snooping network threatened an angry backlash and took the sheen of America's posturing as the leader of the free world. It was missteps like these that further emboldened geopolitical rivals Russia and China, both of whom cashed in on the Snowden leaks.
这严重地违反了国际关系的基本准则，也破坏了中美之间的合作和互信。中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对，已经要求美国方面纠正错误，取消相关的诉讼。
Что касается господина Сноудена, то повторяю еще раз, он не является ни нашим агентом, не сотрудничает с нами. Я вот ответственно вам заявляю, он с нами не сотрудничает и сегодня, и мы с ним не работаем, а считает себя правозащитником.
While ties between Moscow and Beijing warmed further, Washington was awakening to the reality of a new world order, one that was challenging American supremacy. Russian actions in Ukraine in 2014 and its subsequent involvement in Syria, along with China's growing economic and political clout, now as a major power, offered a glimpse into the future. In fact, among the emerging powers, the only real bright spot for the Obama administration has been the growing proximity between Washington and New Delhi.
No wonder that the shared ideals and common philosophy of freedom shape the bedrock of our ties. No wonder then that President Obama has called our ties the defining partnership of the 21st century.
Beyond ties with India, the Obama years also mark some other major gains for America. From the Iran nuclear deal, the rapprochement with Cuba, to the Global Climate Accord and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and of course, the killing of Osama bin Laden and the disintegration of Al-Qaeda. So how will history judge Barack Obama's foreign policy? Well, that's a question that only events of the future can tell. This is Manoj Kevalramani in New Delhi. WION.
Let's bring Giles Gibson back in, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Giles, I know just moments away, less than 10 minutes now until we hear Obama speak his final farewell speech from Chicago. What are some of the key foreign policies that have stood out for you in covering it as an international journalist?
Yeah, well, I think the key point really is we've seen well, they actually sort of announced it, a pivot to Asia. We can see that in sort of U.S. involvement in the South China Sea, trying to sort of back up other countries in that area against what they say is Chinese aggression in that area. We've seen it, as that report was just saying, about the really much closer relationship, and even on a personal level between Narendra Modi and President Barack Obama that we've seen between them. So that pivot to Asia would be the highlight, really. But of course, Obama's critics would say, other than the Iran nuclear deal, his policies have not really gained any traction in the Middle East. We can see the ongoing civil war in Syria now entering its sixth year. Yemen is also sort of facing huge issues, and other parts of the Middle East. So that pivot to Asia is one thing, but a lot of Obama's critics will focus on his policies to the Middle East and, of course, Afghanistan.
And Giles, you know, also in terms of when it comes to some of the policies that he's had with Asia and South Asia, do we expect that to drastically change with Trump? You know, Obama's done quite a bit when it comes to both domestic as well as foreign policies. But when it comes to Trump's stance on that, do we expect a drastic change, as Trump has sort of been threatening almost the complete opposite of what the Democrats have been doing the last 8 years? Or is that too early to tell?
I don't think Trump has been very clear about his intentions for the relationship with India, for example, or Pakistan, certainly in terms of South Asia. What we do know about him in the last few months as he's been president-elect, he's had this incredibly abrasive attitude towards China. So in some senses, that could be seen as kind of continuing Obama's legacy of countering China's sort of growing power in the East. But we'll have to see how that relationship develops, because Donald Trump, certainly some of the tweets that he's made about China has been much more aggressive in tone than anything we would have seen from the Obama administration.
All right, Giles Gibson, thank you so much for updating us. I know you'll be watching that speech. Of course, we're going to be tracking this big development, this big story in just a few moments, and we'll check in with you after Obama's farewell speech, set to happen in just under 5 minutes from Chicago.